Hi guys, and welcome back to another Apex Racing Academy setup tutorial. Alex Simpson here in the brand new McLaren 570s GT4 car. Nice little welcome surprise that we've got this car for this season. And I'm going to give you a bit of a crash course on how to try and set this thing up using some real-world physics, some iRacing physics, and some tips and tricks that we've kind of learned on the way. Now, the idea of this video is to kind of take a setup that you have, that you know is kind of okay, and tweak it for your own personal driving styles. Now, that could be an Apex Racing Academy setup. It could be one that your mate supplied you. It could be one from another setup shop. But the theory behind it should help you across all kind of setups that you've got. So first off, we're going to talk about tyres, we're going to talk about pressure, and we're going to talk about cambers. Then we're going to go a little bit into the aerodynamics of the car, and then go to the front suspension, rear suspension, and that should give us a little wrap. Now, I like to talk a little bit about tyre pressures and how to kind of get them set up. While everyone's like, yeah, Alex, it's the lowest tyre pressure around. It is at the moment on iRacing. We know this. But it's not always been like that. Having been on the sim since 2012, I can tell you we've had max pressures be the ideal thing at one point, and somewhere in the middle. So it can change, and expect that it will change when, iRacing roll out different tyre models. So a quick guide on how to set up some tyre physics after a new build, or tyre pressure, sorry, might give you a good little way to quickly adapt, say, a previous season setup, so you're in a much better range, rather than going, oh no, I've got nothing, they're terrible anymore, I'm 3 seconds off pace, and that's just because the setup's absolutely fine, but iRacing just changed the optimal pressure. So, first thing I want to do, first little tip that I've got, last temp on iRacing. These are exactly as they say, they're the last temperature. That is not an average temperature on your run. So this information tells us nothing. Like, it is not useful at all in any shape or form, I'm afraid. It is just, if you have a big lockup, you'll notice these temperatures are spiked really high. If you just come around a really heavy corner and then escaped out of the sim, again, the one side will be higher temperatures than kind of like the other. If you want to use temperatures as your guide to sort of get cambers and things like that set up, I strongly advise that you use something like the VRS Advanced Telemetry tools or Motec. That's kind of where to go. The tread remaining is a true average of kind of what the tyre's doing over a course of a run. So this is a very useful tool to us, and this is what we're going to use to try and work out the best tyre pressure and the best camber. So let's just say this is a brand new build, which of course it is. This is the default baseline setup. We take the car for a spin, and we do maybe 5-10 laps just to sort of feel it out, see kind of what it's doing, and get some accurate data. 1 or 2 laps is not enough. You need to do more. You're not going to see the difference in the tyre in just 1 or 2 laps. So strongly suggest giving it a nice 10-lap run, something like that. So you come out, you've done that 10-lap run, and let's say for an example at the moment, these drop down to say 95% on the outside and the inside, but this middle temperature, this middle wear rate, dropped down to like 85 or something like that. Now, what that would indicate to me is that the tire pressure is way too high, and we have overinflated the tire. I just quickly cut to the other car. So if you've got so much air into it, what's going to happen is it's just essentially going to blow the car. It's going to make the car sort of stretch out, so that actually it's much more rounded rather than flat. And what you'll have is you'll have only this part of the tire making the contact with the ground, and this is why you'll have just this middle wear rate drop down massively. So that's the first thing, telltale sign, is that you've overinflated. So if that's the case on any new build, you want to try and go down. Of course, as it is right now, set to minimum, so we can't go down. Now what we might get, based on how iRacing is currently, where it's pretty much a minimum everywhere seems to be the way to go, but suddenly we have a build change, tyre changes altogether. Don't know what tyre model we might be on. 15, I don't know. What are we on? 8, 9, 10? I'm not sure now. I've lost track. But it might be that actually these outside and the inside wear rates are a lot lower than the middle. Now, what that tends to tell me is that we have underinflated the tyres. And the reason these outside and inside edges tend to wear is because actually there's not enough pressure in the tyre for it to hold its structure anymore. So when you put in the car through lots of load, so you see we're starting to go into Sunset Bend at Sebring here, and the car has just got this kind of, you can see it sort of leaning over to the left, so it's putting more pressure onto the left-hand side of the tyre. Now what's going to happen is that the tyre is not going to be able to hold its structure. So what's going to happen is the tyre's perhaps going to balloon a little bit out to the outside edge, or maybe all of the pressure, all of the air is going to come to this inside edge. Either way, when you're going round a corner, it's not going to be able to hold the middle of the tyre onto the road. It's always going to be running on absolutely one side. It's essentially going to fold over on itself, and you're going to be running on the outside edge, on the opposite side of the corners, so the other way around. So left-hand bend, it'll be on these edges, and vice versa. So it's on both sides. So that's kind of why it will always wear out those outside and outside and insides of the tyres. And that's just the indication you've kind of got to go up on pressure. So if that ever happens on any future builds and your old setups don't work and you're seeing that straight away, give it a little couple of clicks here and there and just keep going. Take the car out for more laps. You'll find instantly if it's better, the car will feel better. Lap times will come down straight away because you're getting the tyre in an optimal place to try and get the full contact patch on the ground. So that's the key thing. This is what we are trying to get. When we go round a corner, we are trying to get the car set up so that this tyre is essentially 90 degrees angle onto the road. So now it's impossible to get that for every corner, I will point out, because every corner you're going to go around at a different speed and you're going to have different loads in the car. So right now we're going through Sunset. You can see the load on the car is pushing it out towards the left. You can see the car higher on the right here, and it's coming down on the left here. And this is because of the load. Now that will straighten the tyre up somewhat, so that you've got the car almost having the tyre flat as you're going round this right-hander. So that's kind of what you want. It's a balancing act. So some corners that have got high speed and low speed, they're harder to get the right camber settings because we are constantly trying to balance it out. And it might also be why some circuits that have very different kind of layout. So I'm going to say Lime Rock Park is a prime example of this. Like all corners apart from one are a right-hander. So this might be a circuit where your camber settings may actually differ from left to right, because when you're going through left-hand bend, of course, it's this part of this side of the tyre or of the car that's under the most load, so you can afford to change the camber settings ever so slightly. Now, I will say iRacing tends to work best when you have fairly even camber settings, left to right. Some circuits like Lima Park, where it's just one left-hander, will work perhaps slightly better, but it's not as noticeable. But certainly in the kind of real world, they're not going to have absolutely identical cambers all round. If they've sort of spent enough time, they will tweak it ever so slightly. So the ideal, what you're trying to do is you're trying to get, like I say, the average time you're loading up the left-hand side of the car, that this is as close to the middle or as close to vertical as possible. Now, what you will never ever want to do, you'll never ever want this tyre to be at this angle. Because the minute you're gone beyond the centre, the actual tyre then is just running on sort of like the middle and the outside edge, but the G-force will make it slide across the across the asphalt. So you'll actually scrub the tyre and wear it out much, much faster. You always want to be kind of digging in to the ground. So as much as we want an upright camber setting, we also never want to exceed that as well. So typically what we'll probably try and do, the corner with the highest load will typically have this possibly as this almost standing up kind of like camber setting, and then the slowest corner would probably still be as almost like, you know, maximum camber. But yeah, so never go up, you never ever want it sort of coming in this direction. You know, you always want some camber, so it's digging into the asphalt when the car's loaded up. So this, again, this is a right-hander, so we're digging into the left. Faster the corners and things like that, the more that's going to stand up straight. So I just switch back over to our setup screen. So yeah, so when we're trying to work out a camber setting, then it's going to be almost impossible for us to get all three of these wear rates the same, because we're never going to ever load the car up so it's in this kind of angle on a left hander, or on this one, you know, for the right handers and then the left handers. So what we actually really want to do when it comes to fine tuning the cambers after we've got the pressure fairly close, we are going to focus entirely on this inside and middle wear rate. If we can get those the same, that gives us the best average for any specific given track, that we know we're never exceeding our camber, but we are also loading up the tyre the most to get the largest possible contact patch on the car. So if we're slightly over to the middle where it's got a little bit more wear, then I'm going to say we haven't quite got enough camber. And again, if it's too much on this inside, so with the wear rate still higher here than it is on the middle, then I'm saying we've probably got too much camber. You've kind of got to come down. So again, just like pressures, you can't figure this out over a 2-lap run. You've got to put the time in to get 10 laps out of the way. Now, I have to say, you probably only got to do this once in a season, because if you've been on iRacing for a while, you will know that once we figure out the tyre pressures and the cambers, they don't change too much track to track. We are in pretty much the same range for the whole season. It may be, again, like I'm saying, we may go to tracks like Lime Rock or Interlagos that are particularly heavy on one particular side of the car, and then you may have to make some minor adjustments to the camber, but we're only talking 1 or 2 clicks that just to try and even this up. And even then, I think when we're doing those kind of clicks, it's probably not going to make any difference in our Q pace. We're really looking at the long run pace, which, you know, when it comes to the GT cars, that's where we, you know, when we're trying to double stint tires and things like that, that's where we will spend the time. It will be worth us doing 1 or 2 clicks, maybe less camber, if it means we're not as fast at the very start of the race, but our tyre wear rates are far more even across all 4 tyres. That will reward us massively towards the end of the race. People will pull away at start off with, but after 6-7 laps, you're going to start reeling them in very quickly, and at the end of the race, they are going to be nowhere. So that's kind of what we do in terms of pressures. So we're looking either for this inside or outside to try and go up or down. And then we are looking at the inside wear rate compared to the middle in terms of if we need to go up and down on cambers. We've got a higher wear rate here, then we have to go down on the camber. If we have got a lower wear rate here compared to the middle, then we've got to go up. That is true, the front or the back of the car, no different whatsoever. Of course, the way the balance of the car is in terms of weight and things like that might vary why you'll have different cambers front to back, because you have you have like corner weight. You can see there's a lot less weight on the front of the car than there is on the rear of the car, which is why typically you will have perhaps more camber on the rear. And now, of course, we're not showing it on here because that tyre is going to lean over more. Now, of course, there are other factors to take into consideration. That we can talk about anti-roll bars and things like that, which might stop the roll on the rear, why we would affect that. But so keep that in mind as well. All your suspension changes will affect the camber. So you can get these set up, you can get the pressures and the camber set up based on the baseline setup and go, right, I'm in a good position, and then you go off and start fiddling with the suspension, and then when you come back and you do another 10-lap run, you're like, my balance is all out of whack again. And that's because you've changed things in the car that means that the car is either rolling more or less than it was before, and then you need to go and do camber tweaks. So I always think start with the tyres, get the pressure in the cambers right, that gets you in a good place. Then start working on sort of aerodynamics and chassis changes, and then finish again with camber. Always check the camber again. Right. Let's get on to aerodynamics then. So there's not a huge amount that you can change. You think, Alex, it's just the wing settings. That's all we can kind of change. The higher wing number is more downforce. So that's more downforce on the rear of the car, not overall. And that's kind of it. But of course, the car has got the whole car worked like a big wing to some extent, and gives you downforce. Now, so we have a rake that comes into mind. So let me just very quickly get my other sim into a position where I can spin it around and talk about rake. So what is rake? If you're new and don't know, those that watch a bit of Formula 1 should know what rake is, because you will have seen the Red Bull cars, for example. The absolute butt end of a Red Bull car sits miles up from the ground from the front, and what that means is the car profile is kind of like, is at a bit of an angle, and that is acting as a big wing. So the more we bring the rear end up of a car, the more the angle, the profile of attack to the wind. So obviously, as you go faster, the air comes and hits the front of the car. There's a wing, a spoiler here, and the front sort of bonnet and things like that. So the faster you go, the wind will hit that. That'll push it into the ground, and that will give you more front end downforce. So rake, I believe, is the best way to kind of adjust initially a balance of a car. The wing gives you an awful lot of drag. So if, say for example, your the academy setup perhaps is a tiny bit oversteery for you, a very easy fix can be to lower the rear end of the car. Because if you lower the rear end of the car, we reduce this angle that the body of the car is running at, which means that we reduce the amount of downforce coming into the front of the car, like as the wind hits it, because it's a much less angle. We're not talking massive amounts here. It does make a difference. And what will happen is that the car won't turn in quite as bit, so we will have a less aggressive turn-in profile, so that will reduce the oversteer. So I'm thinking of corners like Blanchimont at Spa. If you're trying to go through there and the car's really skittish, for example, then just dropping the rear of that car can take off a little bit of oversteer feeling and just settle the car. So that's something you can use. So that's just drop the rear end ride heights down, and that will give you kind of at the moment. So say for example that was the case. We were at 94.7. Yeah, let's change the spring offset down. We'll keep it even on one side. Ignore the camber thing for the moment. Oops, too low. Apply that. Just to figure out what it's trying to do to me. There we go. We'll get there eventually. There we go. So let's say that again you felt the car was just a little bit too skittish. We're able to use the spring perch offset just to lower the car down a little bit. I'm going to do one more click. It's going to go invalid again, maybe. No, it's not on the cambers. And this would have taken just a little bit of that rotational twitchiness away and give you a little bit of understeer, settle the car. So if you're not trying to make sweeping changes to the car, like if the car doesn't feel too bad, but it's just a little bit tricky, then rake really needs to be your go-to place. Now, of course, the opposite is true. If it's just not quite turning enough, then you're going to want to increase the rear of the car, and that will give you a higher sort of rake profile, and the car will turn again. Now, typically, the settings that you're going to get, we're going to have a very low ride height on the front of the car. The aerodynamics, keeping the air from underneath the car, usually gives you the best aero profile. So most settings are going to have them fairly low on the front end. So it's typically the rear that we will go to try and adjust the rake angle. Of course, if you get a setup that has not got that front end absolutely pinned to the ground, then you can adjust the rake using the front end. So lower the front end, that will increase the rake angle. That will give you more turning. Raising the front will also decrease that rake angle, which will ensure that you're taking a bit of the turn off. Now, there are some circuits where you are going to have to sort of adjust the rake on the front to get a balance. Now, a specific circuit like that comes to mind, to me, there are probably two really. Le Mans, and there is Monza. Prime examples. Because no matter what, at those circuits, you're going to want maximum straight line speed. So your wing angle here is going to be set to 1. Now, the minute you do that, that takes off the downforce on the rear of the car, pushes it all the way to the front of the car. Sorry, I just realised I was not on the setting there. So hopefully you did see the bit about the ride heights. So yeah, so the ride heights here were at 94. We dropped the ride height down to give us the lower ride height. So yeah, so I was talking about Le Mans and Monza. So this wing angle here at 3, that gives you downforce on the rear of the car. It's just producing understeer. That's all it does. It's drag and it's understeer. That is what it's doing. So if at Monza we were to run this, we're going to be slow in a straight line. This is going to be 1 always at circuits like that where speed comes into consideration. Now you may say to me, well, Alex, I'm running it at 1, but the Ascari chicane's awful. Like, those high-speed corners, the car's just all over the shot. I can't get any power down or anything. It's massively oversteery, or through the parabolica, or at Le Mans, you might be like Indianapolis, it's undrivable. The Porsche curve's undrivable. It's so oversteery. Now, what that is, because we've taken all the downforce off the rear of the car, with the wing, we're going to have massive amounts of front end downforce because all the air is going to hit the front, and we're not balancing it out with the rear. So it's all the weight has moved, all the aero balance has moved towards the front end of the car. So what we need to do is we need to drop this rake at the back, so the rear end will come down, or or maybe both, we bring the front end of the car up. This will level out the rake profile of the car, and that will give you a much better balance in those high-speed circuits. So small adjustments on the aero and the ride heights can make a big difference to how the car turns in and out of corners, how it handles those fast and high-speed circuits as well. Right, I hope that gives you a kind of good idea on kind of what we're doing. More wing, less oversteer, less wing, more oversteer, but more straight line speed, more wing, obviously slower in a straight line, so you've kind of got to balance that out. Typically, any set you've got, your buddy, any setup shop, they're going to have the right kind of wing setting that you need. It may be that their rake profile is either a bit aggressive or not aggressive enough for your driving style. So just tweak these ride heights ever so slightly just to get it a bit more comfortable for you. Right, so let's talk about some of the suspension then. So anti-roll bar, what is an anti-roll bar and what does it do? Right, let me just quickly adjust my my other screen again so I can explain to you, and I want to get a corner with a decent amount of roll on it. Give me a second, I'm just doing this off screen so you can't see. Right. Okay, so an anti-roll bar, we've got one at the front and we've got one at the back, and they do exactly the same thing. And they are designed to essentially stop the car from rolling. So when we say roll, you can see how the car is leaning over to the left-hand side again, because we're going through the right-hander, the penultimate corner at Sebring. It will reduce how much that car rolls over to the left and rolls over to the right through left and right hand turns. Now, the reason we kind of do, and we will have a anti-roll bar on the car, is because we don't want to exceed our camber limits. So obviously we only have a finite amount of camber adjustments we can do, and if the car is so soft, so if we had like this really soft suspension and no anti-roll bars whatsoever, essentially this right hand side of this car is going to lift up as it's going through, and it's going to roll over on itself. We're going to exceed our camber, we're going to run on the outside of the car, of the carcass of the tyre, and we're going to lose all our grip. So this is kind of what the anti-roll bar is there to do. It's just to try and prevent the roll on the car and keep the tyre contact patch as large as possible. Now, the more load on a car through a corner, so a high-speed corner, the roll bar is going to kind of kick in a little bit more. So it can limit how much the car rolls in high speed, bringing your ideal contact patch and camber setting closer together. So this is how we can get a kind of better setup. If we didn't have anything to be miles apart, so high-speed corners would be like either really good, but slow speeds would be awful, or slow speeds would be great and high speeds would be awful, because we could just never get the tyre ever to be in a really good position. So we can use the anti-roll bar just to kind of aid us in fine-tuning the contact patch on the tyre. But I will be honest and say that I don't genuinely believe setting the anti-roll bar up and worrying about the tyre wear is what you should be doing. I think you should be doing it more on the feel of the car and how it rotates in and out of a corner. So if I just come back over here and we'll switch to the garage. So on the front, a lower anti-roll bar setting, so like a 1, that's a softer setting. It's 1 and 2, we haven't got much to change here. So a softer setting will allow the car to sort of bite into the ground. It'll allow it to roll and bite into the ground just a little bit more. And when that does that, that will mean it will generate more grip onto the car. It's like having a softer front end as well. So just more think of this as a way. So a lower setting, you're going to get more turn in. A higher setting, you're going to get less turn in. So softer will give you that more rotation. Stiffer will give you more push, I guess, and more understeer. Now, what I want to just talk about very quickly, because ARBs are pretty linked, and the rear is completely opposite to the front. So a softer anti-roll bar will give you more grip on the rear, but because it's on the rear, it pushes the balance of the car back towards the rear of the car. You think about the center of gravity of a car, and what we've got, so if you say like, this is our center point of gravity, the car's rotating perfectly. But if suddenly we make the front more understeery, well, then the balance shifts more towards the back. And so it won't rotate quite as much. So if we, of course, make the rear anti-roll bar softer, then what we're doing is we're giving more grip to the rear of the car, which again shifts that balance to the back, which means that the car will not rotate as much. So it's the opposite way around. A soft anti-roll bar won't give you more rear grip, more rear rotation. It will actually take away rear rotation, but it will give you more actual grip. So again, if you're finding that the car is perhaps a bit skittish in some places on the rear through some of these sort of medium speed corners and things like that, then perhaps actually just going down on your ARB blades on the rear here might be a really good tip for you, just to give yourself a little bit more grip. So yeah, don't get confused by doing the same setting. So again, yes, right. So I want more rotation. Great, go one here, one here. All you've done is counteract yourself. And then if you go, no, it's not the same, 2 and 2, you've kind of counteracted yourself again in terms of balance. If you're trying to find a balance change and you're just going front to back, doing the same setting changes, you're not going to find that balance change. So yeah, just doing one at a time, that will give you a balance change. Go ahead and do that. So toe in on the front of the car. Now typically we're going to run the toes fairly close to, I always think, as close to 0 is the best. Now this is all about heat. Toe really produces a lot of heat in the car. The more heat that you've got, the faster the tyre is going to wear out on iRacing. We all know this, so we need to avoid that as much as possible. Now, having a larger negative toe will help the car turn in. It can be really useful for qualifying when we've only got a couple of laps, but I don't think it's very good for race runs. So a pretty good rule of thumb is to try and get that toe in as close to 0 as you can. Now, there are lots of setups out there that do run it sort of anywhere from perhaps, 2 to 0, I would say. There's a kind of a good window that you can kind of play with. So if you want to fine tune your setup to give you just a hair more turn in, then use some extra negative toe in. That will help the car turn in. But remember, that is always going to be at a cost of tyre life on your long run. So think about kind of what is important to you. Is it qualifying and short pace, or have you got pace in at the end of the run to spare, and you just want to try and find a little bit of pace earlier on? Then go with that front. That will give you a little bit of extra turn in. Right, cross weight. You're pretty much typically going to want this on 50%. The only reason we would have cross weight, what that means is that essentially the weights on the four corners of the car don't match sort of left to right, and when that happens, it kind of skews the car, and it will want to rotate one way better than another. So we always want the cross weight to be as close to 50 as we can get. That will give us a better balanced car, so it will turn left-hand corners as well as it will turn right-hand corners. Of course, there are some circuits where you won't want to do that. Ovals, for example, you're always going to run some additional cross weight because you'll want the car to rotate left all the time. You don't care about the right-hand side. And again, maybe some circuits like Lime Rock Park, they are always right-hand corners, so you actually want your cross weight to be under 50%. Under 50%, you get better right-hand turns. Over 50%, you get better left-hand turns. Just reading the information just to make sure I'm not absolutely talking nonsense. I didn't bring it up here. Vehicle. So percentage of vehicle weight on the left rear and the right front of the tyre. More cross weight equals more understeer in left-hand turns. Okay, so sorry, it was the opposite way around. More oversteer in right-hand turns. Yeah, so if we have like a 51% here, we're going to be like, that's going to be better for a like a Lime Rock Park. A sub 50% is going to be better on like your ovals and things like that. Not that you're going to go to many of them, but I suppose to some extent, I'm thinking about Daytona Road. No, that's got a good mixture of left and right turns. So, but you're rarely going to use it. So stick with 50, please, guys. If it's not on 50, it means you've got a setting somewhere wrong. Perhaps a spring perch offset is not set the same left to right, or camber settings are not set left to right wrong, and that's what's producing the cross weight. So try and even that back out to 50. Brake pressure bias. So again, 50% obviously should give you absolutely optimal braking performance, because both ends of the car are braking at exactly the same time. If you find that you're locking up the front end tyres as you're coming into a corner, it may be that the brake bias is too far forward and you need to shift it further towards the rear. And this will then optimize your braking. Everybody brakes differently, so nobody's brake pressure settings are going to be the same. Now the pros, if you've ever got a pro setup, you know, these guys are nuts. You know, they run their brake bias at like, you know, they'll run their brake bias at about 10 on the back if they could. You know, so like, yeah, so 90% on the back, 10 on the front. I don't know how they do it. Now, you know, you've got to be really, really, really talented to run some of these extreme brake pressures. No, sorry, it's an exaggeration. No one ever runs it at 10, but they are really low. Like, you know, this car, they might be running it at like 45 or something like that. If the back end is just all over the place for you in braking and you keep looping it, just move the brake bias forward, balance yourself out. You don't have to run these crazy brake pressures that the pros run. You know, it's been a long time since I've been in a world championship race and things like that, but I never ever run the same brake pressures as my teammates when I was back in the Formula One world championship days. I always ran it more forward. I was always looping the car when I was running their same pressure. I had no confidence in the car or anything. And to be honest, I was able to match their pace just fine. And that's perhaps because I got a slightly different braking technique to what they had, and that was causing me to rotate the car in a different way. So do not worry about swapping the brake bias a little bit further forward if you kind of need to balance the car out. And the brake pads, so the different friction, you've got low, medium, and high. Now, we typically in iRacing we're going to run a lower friction. And the reason we're going to do that, again, it all comes down to heat. Heat is king with iRacing. The more we heat those tires up, the faster they're going to wear out, and the less grip we're going to have. Now, if we are in a high friction brakes, that's going to put the car's going to stop really fast. It's going to be really good on the brakes, but it's going to generate loads of heat with it. And the more heat we generate, the less grip we get. So it's pretty good tip at the moment to run a low friction brakes and kind of get used to the braking points there, because overall in a race run, that's going to be much better. Now, quali, you might want to go high friction brakes, so that because you're not worried about that heat quite so much. You know, and Where you're going to use medium, if you just cannot get used to braking on the low friction, so you think, my God, I'm having to brake so early, Alex, this is ridiculous, then go up to the medium. Just don't compromise your braking. If you just can't get it, go to that medium. It'll give you something just a little bit into the middle. Right. So we've got a few different in-car adjustments that we can make here as well. So we've got the ARBs, ABS, traction control settings as well. So we've got track, we've got sport, and we've got kind of normal. So I'm just reading the information just to make sure I give you this all right. So the level of ABS braking, traction control, and electronic stability control assist. Track equals minimum assist, sport equals medium assist, and normal equals maximum assist. So you can't adjust each setting manually. So let's say, for example, you are struggling with locking up the brakes, but you have no issues whatsoever with the traction control or the stability under braking. By going from, say, normal up to sport or up to even track, that's going to give you better ABS, but at the cost of traction control, because the traction control is going to kick in more, which is going to slow your acceleration out of corners. It's going to give you more sort of stability control as well. So you do want to fine tune that to try and find the kind of the best all-round setting for you. If you can run with none, so so normal, that's going to be the fastest because it's going to the traction control is going to kick in less, so you're not going to be limiting the power going through the tires under acceleration. The ABS, you're going to try and get them, you're going to try and get the brakes manually or the tires to their threshold without exceeding the maximum braking. So again, that will be ideal. This is why you find with the non-GT3, so the GTEs, you don't brake 100% on the GTEs. You're braking at like sort of 75% of them available, because you don't want to overheat the tire and lock them up. You're trying to keep just below the point where they're essentially going to lock. Now that's what ABS does for you in the GT3 all the time. That's great. You have that as a separate setting. In the GT4, you don't. So you really want to learn to brake at the optimal amount. So don't over brake the car so that you don't have to have this really high traction control setting, reducing how much acceleration you're getting out of corners as well. So yeah, have a good play with that. Try and find the perfect balance. Right, let's move on and let's talk about sort of the spring rates in the car. What do spring rates do as well? So a softer car will always want to dig into the ground a little bit more and will rotate better. A stiffer car, that will have a faster response time to any kind of changes you do, but will not dig in as much, so it will actually give you a little bit more understeer. So I tend to sort of break the soft and sort of the stiff up into different areas of the circuit. I think a softer car in like a more twisty circuit will be a better way to go. A really high speed circuit is going to be rewarded. It's going to reward you on with having a stiffer suspension, because it's going to react better going into those faster corners. So it's not going to take a while for the load to build up on the side of the car you want. So if say for example we're obviously here at Sebring. If say for example going into like the hairpin and maybe the first sector, you find that the car is just a bit understeery, then I think going down, okay, we're as soft as we are, typical, on the baseline, it would kind of help you. So if you had got this setting and it was 175, I mean, what's the range? You haven't got much. You've got two settings to deal with in the GT4s. Let's say it was a 175. On the soft ones and hairpin, you're like, I just want a little bit more rotation through the middle of these corners. Then going down on this spring rate will kind of give you that. So let me just put it to 175 at the moment. We'll apply that. Notice the ride height change as well. when you change back to 18 to 140, it goes down to 79.3. So keep that in mind when you make spring changes. You think, wow, yeah, Alex said, you know, I'm a bit understeering these medium and slow speed corners. I'll go softer. Just be mindful that you've just dropped nearly 5 mil on the front end. So you've also increased your rake again. So it might throw the balance out massively. So what can be a good thing to do here, if you just want that little bit of extra turn, but you don't want to affect the rake, is that you can kind of, oh, gone the wrong way. You can go up on the spring perch offset here, and we're trying to get it back to sort of, what was it? It was about 84, wasn't it? So there we go. So we've changed the spring perch offset. We've increased the ride height. Again, so the aerodynamics is much closer to where it was before. It's not going to be perfect. I will point out, when we get into real high levels of detail, because this spring rate is softer, the air just flowing over the car naturally now when you're going down the straights and through the corners will push the front end down ever so slightly more, because you haven't got the same spring to push against it. So it still will give you a fraction more rake. So just keep that in mind as well. So it may be that you might just want to go like another click or something like that on the spring perch. In this particular case, you're not going to be able to do it because it's going to be massive change, like for example. So it's definitely going to give you negative. So just try and get it close to, but understand kind of what you're doing. So yeah, medium and slow speed corners, I think if you're understeering, you know, go softer on the spring rate. If you're oversteering, go stiffer. And on high speed corners, if you've got initial understeer, so when you initially turn in, I believe actually you want to go stiffer on the front. And that will make the car more responsive in those high speed sections. So that will reduce the understeer in those very, like, as you initially turn in. Through the middle of the corner, if it pushes like a dog again, then yeah, bring it back down, because it's that mid corner that you need, and maybe go up on the front anti-roll bar. That will also stop the roll and make the car more responsive, but still give you this soft suspension on the through the middle of the corner. And a suspension will give you much more effect than what the anti-roll bar will. The anti-roll bar will be minor, the suspension will be much more major in terms of the balance. Obviously, we've seen how we have used the spring perch offsets to adjust the ride heights, and how and why we would do that for like aerodynamics. Of course, you can also adjust the ride heights to aid in terms of smashing into big curbs, sausage curbs and things like that. It may be that, you know, you just need a little bit more clearance and things like that, especially at Sebring. We've got some whopping great big bumps here. It may be that you're just bottoming out the car. If you look at the telemetry data, it's just constantly smashing against the bottom of the ground. And it may be you just need to raise the car up a little bit. And again, you can just do that with a couple of quick little clicks, and you've got another 1.5 mil clearance, and that might be enough just to stop it from bottoming out. We've talked about camber in terms of how and why we would adjust that. It's all about getting that inside and middle wear rate effective. The more camber will affect the inside of the tire. The less moving it back to a lower setting here will mean more middle of the tire kind of will get worn out. So I'm going to come back to the dampers in a moment. I want to quickly switch over to the spring rates on the rear. Like the anti-roll bars, they are polar opposite in terms of how they affect the balance of the car. A softer spring will give you, just like the same, more grip. But of course, it's more grip at the back of the car again. So again, we start to give much more grip to these rear tires. That's going to shift the balance much more towards the rear, giving us less grip at the front, which means more understeer. So where the front of the car, a softer made it turn in more, a softer is going to give you more understeer in terms of the balance. So if the car is a bit oversteery in these medium and slow speed corners, then go with a go with a softer. So if it's oversteering, go with a softer. That will kind of balance it out just a little bit. If it's understeering, then what you really want to do is you want to come back into the garage, and you'll want to increase increase the rear spring rate to help it kind of turn much. And again, there's not a huge amount of settings that we've got on this McLaren, just 2, and that kind of will affect it. So yeah, so go up. But again, remember what you've done is you've changed that rear ride height. So let's put it back to, so we were 92.7. Go back, and then we need to change the spring perch offsets at 92.5. Not too bad. So close enough to kind of where we were. Important to do that. Just changing the springs not only changes the mechanical balance, but changes that aerodynamic balance. So do one thing at a time. Make sure you change that spring perch offset. So yeah, just to recap, softer at the rear means more understeer or less oversteer. Stiffer means more oversteer and more rotation. Right, so toe-in at the back, pretty much the same kind of as the front. A larger negative number will actually give you more rotation kind of into the corner. And again, at the cost of heat. Typically, you are going to run, I don't know if they changed it so you can't go negative. I think I saw that on a lot of the cars. Yeah, they've done that. So you're going to run, you're probably going to be running, this is going to be your setting, to be fair. Don't want to sort of take too much away. So if you can use it to balance, if you find that your car, it's turning in just a little bit too much, just want to take a little bit off of it, then by all means just go up a click or something like that on the toe in at the back, and that will kind of help ever so slightly. But you want it as close to 0 as you can. That produces the least amount of heat, which is going to help you in your race run, which is kind of why you're going to want to be close to there as well. And also, the closer you get to 0, you'll notice actually at circuits like Le Mans, the faster the car is in a straight line too. So let's just use that as a little tip. Right, let's talk about dampers. We need to talk about the dampers, the front and the back at the same time, because they very much affect each other. So a bump stiffness on the front of the car will affect how the car rotates into a corner. And the rebound stiffness. Right, sorry, I was getting my head around that. Yes, so bump stiffness affects the rotation in. The rear rebound affects the rotation into a corner as well. Now, the rebound stiffness, that affects the rotation coming off of a corner on the front, and the bump stiffness affects the rotation off of a corner on the rear. If I switch over to the picture of the car again, I can probably explain a little bit better. So when you come into a corner and you brake, you always see the front end of the car come down. Now that is the bump. You're effectively engaging the bump damper here. When the front comes down, the rear also comes up under braking, and that affects the rear damper. So what the damper is actually trying to do is, the more damping you have, which means it's trying to stop that front end from coming down, so stopping the chassis moving towards the ground, or slowing it down more than anything. So it's dampening it rather than actually sort of stopping it. It essentially is keeping your rake angle in check. It's trying to keep your rake balance in check. So it has an aerodynamic effect on how this car it will transition into a corner. So if you have no damping whatsoever, it will essentially, the spring will dampen it to some extent, but it will kind of drop pretty quickly to its kind of like its bump stop. We don't see that on the sim, but there is one there. And then this splitter will be as low to the ground as possible, and you'll have lots of turning. So I'll bring back up the in-car settings in a moment. But a lower setting, so a lower reduced amount of damping, will mean that this front will drop, which means you've got more turning because you've got more rake angle because this front's lower than the rear. This will give you much more turning into the corner. So if you need a little bit of extra turning on corner, drop that front bump stiffness. On the rear, as I was saying, it's the rebound. Because the rear comes up, that's the rebound damper. So if you're trying to dampen how quickly this rear end comes up, so more damping, what that will do is it will try and keep this rear end pinned and it will be slower to come up. So again, that will affect the rake angle of the car. So more damping means less rotation, and less damping means it will just freely let this rear end poke up into the air and give you more rake angle on the car. It's not just rake, it's fair to say, because actually if you reduce how this back end pokes up in the air, and you reduce how much the front end pokes, essentially pushes down on the car, you're actually affecting the weights, how the balance or the weight shifts in the car towards the front. It's still going to be shifted to the front, but not as much. That's the thing. So there is a weight balance shift as well that also comes into effect with the damping. So the more or the less damping you have, the more this front tire is going to be loaded up. But of course, the less amount of rebound damping you have, so the car comes scooting up at the back, the less amount of load the rear has as well. So that was why also it gives you a bit of extra turns. It's twofold. It's not just mechanical, it's not just aerodynamic. It is absolutely both, but both have the same effect, that they're going to give you more rotation if you do that. So yeah, so a lower number here and a lower number here on the rebound. That's going to make the car much more turny going into the corner. Right, cancel that. Now the opposite is true. So of course, if you want less turning, then you go higher here, and you go higher here. Now we're trying to keep the car from rotating because we're trying to keep the weight more on the rear, trying to keep the aerodynamic rake angle from being less aggressive going into the corner. So we're trying to give more understeering. Right. So let's look at the rebound on the front of the car and see what that affects. And let's talk about the bump stiffness and see what that affects. And of course, that is opposite. So when does the front end of the car poke up in the air? When does that rear end of the car come down? So when we accelerate out of a corner, we normally have like the car will squat. Some of the cars in the day, would have had anti-squat and all that kind of stuff because they want to keep the balance of the car in check. But yeah, so when you accelerate, the rear squats down, the front comes up. So the minute you transition through a corner from, let me see if I can do this on slow mo. This is a pretty good corner. I'm not sure actually it's gonna be able to see this. It's quite bumpy, isn't it, Sebring? The minute kind of like we're watching Ray here actually get onto the gas, we should see that it's too bumpy. You can't really tell with the replay, but essentially the rear end is now kind of squatting down on the front, on the rear, and the front has kind of come up. So it's very minor. It's not a great corner to see it because it's bouncing around, it's Sebring and things like that. But certainly as you transition onto the power, this rear comes down, the front comes up, and that is what we are affecting with the damping that we pointed out. So the rebound stiffness, the more damping we have, that's going to try and prevent that front from coming up. So if we're trying to prevent that, what we're trying to actually do is keep this splitter on the ground. So that means, again, we're trying to give it more rotation because we're trying to keep the rake angle intact. So it will rotate more off the corner. So more damping means more rotation on the front rebound damper. On the rear, because it's the rear that's squatting down, if we try and prevent that rear from squatting, that's trying to keep the rake angle up high to keep the car rotating through the corner. So if we've not got enough rotation, we want loads of bump stiffness rebound to keep that car up in the air, keep the rear of that car up in the air rather than it squatting down through acceleration. Now, of course, the opposite is true. If you want more rotation, if you want less rotation, if the car is rotating too much, then we want to let this rear end drop. So we want this rake angle to be reduced. We want to load up this rear tire more. We want to unload this front tire by allowing the rebound to come up. That's how we kind of affect it. So you can do obviously one setting at a time, but this is one of those few settings where actually I think doing both the front and the back at the same time is a really good idea. So let's just point again into the sim just so that you can be sure that you know kind of what I mean. So lowering this bump stiffness on the rear, that is essentially going to allow the rear end of the car to squat down coming out of the corner, and that's going to give it more rear end grip, shifting the balance more towards the rear, to take the rake angle off the car, and it's going to give you a little bit more understeer, less rotation. And on the front rebound stiffness, so again, giving it less setting here, that will allow that front end to come up. That's going to give you less rake angle again because the front end's going to raise up in the air, and it's going to unload the front tires, so it's going to give you less rotation coming off the corner. We want more rotation, we go the other way. We stiffen it up to like 15, say here, and then we've got the bumps again. Let's say we want that right up as well. So this will give us loads of rotation off of a corner. Right, I hope that's a good guide. I'm sorry guys, that was an hour long. But I hope that's kind of give you the information what you will have wanted, and we'll go ahead and, like I say, we'll time code like this video. If you've got any questions, post it on the forum. I think we're posting this in the McLaren thread just as a useful guide to you guys. It's also going to be on our YouTube channel, so by all means post some questions on there. We'll try and help out absolutely the best we can. Obviously, like I say, this is about trying to take a setup from, a fairly good base that you've got either from your mate or one of the setup shops. Obviously, I recommend the Apex Racing Academy. Yeah, we'll should be able to fine tune this for your own driving styles, and we're happy to lend a hand and do that in our group coaching sessions as well. Thanks for the time in watching the video. Hit the thumbs up if you've enjoyed it, and yeah, I guess I'll catch you for another one when iRacing roll out their next new car. Thanks for listening. See you again, guys.